answer some sourdough frequently asked questions. On my Instagram page recently, I asked you to provide me with any sourdough related questions, troubleshooting, my sourdough journey, creating sourdough content, personal life, anything that you're curious about. And there were hundreds of questions, so it was hard to kind of pick and choose, but I picked the most common ones and some that just seemed fun to answer. So let's get right into it. Can your starter stay on the counter versus the fridge when not in use? Absolutely, that's what I do. I don't bake every single day, but I do keep my starter on the counter. It keeps my starter nice and healthy. A lot of people think that it's a really big waste to keep your starter on your counter and to feed it daily if you're not baking every day, but you just don't feed as much. You can feed as little as 3 grams starter, 15 grams flour, 15 grams water once a day, and it'll keep your starter nice and active and healthy, and you're not going to be left with a ton of discard. One of my favorite sourdough accounts, Parker from Basil and Bloom, talks all the time about how to maintain a starter at room temperature without creating a ton of discard. Highly recommend his page. When will your mom get her own Insta? So probably never. My mom is not interested in making a sourdough Instagram page. Currently, she just sends me all of her little video clips and I edit them and add them to my stories. And then I save those to a highlight on my Instagram profile called My Mom. So if you want to watch any of her sourdough journey, just feel free to click on My Mom and you can get up to date. I've told her that many of you want her to have her own handle, but she just is not interested in doing it. Where do I find glass sourdough bowls? All the bowls I found are so small. So my favorite glass bowls fit about 3 loaves at a time comfortably. They're linked in my Amazon storefront, and I'll also put the link to those below. My other favorite one is actually an 8-cup measuring bowl, and that fits 1 loaf perfectly. And I like that one because it has milliliter markings on the side, so it's nice if you want to measure percentage rise. Do you spray the inside of the bulk fermentation container with butter or other oil? No. How do I find your discard recipes? Just go to my website, thatsourdoughgal.com, and there's a recipes drop down, and you just click on sourdough discard recipes, and it'll take you to all of them that I have published. I'll also put the link to that in the description. You are too kind. Thank you. What brand are your Banneton baskets? My favorite brand is Flower Side. I talked to the owner and we had a really nice discussion. He is a kind soul who really has a passion for the sourdough community. He just blew me away with his kindness, and his Banneton baskets are my favorite type, which is wood pulp, so I just love that brand. Another good option is Bolka. They also sell wood pulp Bannetons on Amazon. Those are just my personal favorite kinds. How many videos do you try and film per day/week? Trying to grow my Dobert account. Love that name, Dobert, that's so cute. I try to post at least once a day. It's a lot of work. I do one longer video here on YouTube once a week. So far, the once a week deal that I've made with myself has held up, but I feel like I'm always behind. It's a lot of work. Editing videos is a ton of work. Honestly, I need help, but I don't even know where to begin with that, so. Bread flour or all-purpose flour to feed your starter? I feed my starter bread flour, but you can do either one. Can you take dough from the cold retard stage and bring it back out if you're second guessing your fermentation? Absolutely, I have done this before, especially if I did a double batch. If I baked the first loaf and it was under fermented, obviously I don't want to bake the second one knowing it's going to be a dud, right? I mean, we still eat it, but you'd rather it be as close to perfection as possible. So in that case, I would bring out my other loaf that's in the Banneton out of the fridge, set it on the counter at room temperature, and let it come up to room temperature, and then do a second rise on the counter until it's nice and airy and jiggly and risen even more, and then I would bake it. That can take longer than you probably think. In my home, it takes like 6 to 8 hours for something out of the fridge to come up to room temp and then to rise enough to be ready to bake. So give yourself a good amount of time. Have you ever taken your discard and fed it to bring it back as active starter? Absolutely, all the time. You can do that. Discard is just inactive starter. So if you want to make it active again, just bring it out and feed it. Do you always do an Autolyse? No, I do not always do an Autolyse. When I do it, I'm like, gosh, I need to do this more often because it's just amazing how strong it makes your dough with little to no effort, but it is an extra step. And sometimes I don't want to do all the steps, you know. Strengthen a weak starter with temps around 65. Struggling. Quit for winter. Don't quit for winter. So many people say, oh, I'm just going to give up sourdough for the winter and start back up in the summer. You can do this. You just have to adjust things for the cold temperature. Just know that everything's going to take longer. So if you normally feed your starter like a 1 to 5 to 5 feeding ratio, during the wintertime, that may be too high. Maybe adjust to a 1 to 1 to 1 feeding ratio, which is equal parts starter flour and water, and see if that works a little bit better for your schedule, because it's gonna rise and fall a lot slower in the cool temps. You can also enjoy an overnight bulk fermentation. Put your dough together around dinner time, get all your stretch and folds in before bed, and then just let your dough hang out on the counter while you're sleeping. That way in the morning you can take a look at it. It might need a little bit longer, or it might be ready to shape when you wake up, which is a beautiful thing. I love an overnight bulk fermentation, but you can't really get away with it unless you have a cool home, so enjoy it. After a 6-hour bulk fermentation, my dough is not fluffy like yours on top. It has a skin. Normal? If your dough has a skin, I think whatever cover you're using on your bowl is letting too much oxygen in, and that's causing a skin to form on top of your dough, which is not ideal. So I'm just guessing that you're using like a towel or a cheesecloth or something. And honestly, the best thing is plastic. I hate to say that, but plastic wrap or like a shower cap cover works beautifully. There are also reusable bowl covers that you can try. There's beeswax ones, cloth ones. The beeswax ones I'm not so sure on, because I recently did an overnight bulk fermentation with bagel dough with the beeswax bowl cover on top, and my dough had a skin on top. Unfortunately, I have better luck currently with the cotton ones. I'll link my favorite one in the description, but usually just a dry towel or cheesecloth is not gonna work as a bowl cover. How long can dough stay in the fridge before you bake it? I've tried lots of different timelines, but I find overnight is best, like 12 to 16 hours just gives me a wonderful, fluffy, great oven spring loaf. And I've gone as high as 4 days, and that was really delicious, super tangy, very, very sour flavor, not as high of an oven spring when you go longer on the cold fermentation. I did go up to 5 days once and did not like that. Some people do, so I'm not saying you can't do it, but I would say anywhere from 2 hours would be like the minimum, up to 4 days. But just experiment around and see what you like. Once you get your starter going, how do you go on vacation for a week? Honestly, just put your starter in the fridge. I think probably the best timing, if you plan well enough, is to feed your starter, let it get close to peaking, like let it rise a little bit, and then stick it in the fridge. And then when you get back from vacation, if it's still active and bubbly in your fridge, you might be able to just take it out and put a loaf together just like that. If it's fallen and it seems like it needs fed again before using it, just feed it once and you should be good to go. Can you use tap water that has a water softener? There is no fluoride or chlorine. Absolutely, that is what I do. Can you keep adding discard to the same discard jar over time? Absolutely you can. That's what I do. What happens if you don't feed the discard sitting in your fridge? How long does it last? I have a discard jar hanging out in my fridge that's been in there for probably a year, and I think it's fine. Honestly, I think if I just poured off the hooch on top, or had my friend Jimmy come over and drink the rest of the hooch.
Waste it from yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Pour me another, bartender.
Honestly, I think if I just took out a little bit and fed it like a really big feeding, like say 10 grams of that really old discard and 50 grams flour, 50 grams water, if I did that every day, 3 to 4, maybe 5 times, I think it would be just fine. And it would be a great, lovely, active starter again. What happens is the longer you let your discard sit in the fridge, the weaker it gets over time. So it's easier to bring out a 1-week-old discard from your fridge, feed it and get it nice and active again, versus a 1-year-old discard. The 1-year-old discard is gonna take a lot more effort to get it nice and bubbly and healthy again versus the 1-week-old. So the longer you let it go, the more work it's gonna be on your part to get it happy again. How long does it last in the fridge? Honestly, I don't know. I have not pushed that limit beyond about a year, and at a year, it still looks fine, but I haven't tested it. I've just seen other people bring out really old starter and revive it with no problem. Do you have a nanny? Not anymore, but for the last 5 years, yes, we had a nanny. There's no way I would have been able to work from home while also taking care of kids. We just decided as a family that daycare was not for us. That was just a personal choice we made. So not anymore though. All of our kids are officially in school. We do miss our nanny Aurora, but we don't miss spending that much money. Love you. Is sourdough for beginners? Absolutely, sourdough is for beginners. You don't have to know everything to get started. My mom is a perfect example. She blew me off for so long and was like, I'm not doing sourdough. It's too complicated. I can't even wrap my head around it. I could never. And then I went there for Thanksgiving, left her some starter. She panicked, and I just gave her a simple recipe and said, just do it. It might turn out terrible, but just do it. The more that you do, the more that you learn, the better your loaves will be. And now it's like no big deal. She makes loaves of bread all the time. She doesn't want to go into the weeds. She doesn't really care that much about the science. Doesn't care about getting a perfect loaf. She just wants edible bread that her husband and my brother enjoy. And that's what she's doing. And she's loving it. You don't need to be an expert to make sourdough. Why doesn't my loaf get golden brown? First, that would be your oven. Your baking temperature and your baking time. Everyone's oven is different, but what I do and what seems to be pretty standard is 450 degrees Fahrenheit, covered for 30 minutes and uncovered for 10 to 15 minutes. If you're doing something similar to that and your loaf is still very pale, it's probably under-fermented. Under-fermented dough tends to stay pale, whereas over-fermented dough tends to get very, very brown due to the sugars on the surface. Is it okay to do coil folds instead of stretch and fold through the whole gluten building process? Absolutely, you can do either one. It's somewhat of a personal preference. I usually like to start out with 2 sets of stretch and folds, and then I'll do the last 2 sets as coil folds because it's gentler on the dough. Does the wood pulp Banneton dry out everyone's loaf in the fridge? Just me? Yes, and that is by design. The wood pulp absorbs moisture from your loaf of bread, which helps it to be easier to score, and it also makes for a crispy, more crackly crust after it's baked. I adore it. I know I did see one lovely woman recently on her stories compare that versus the rattan style, and she preferred the rattan style. So experiment and find what you like, but wood pulp just has my heart. I absolutely love it, and I love the results that it gives me. Tips on eyeballing water and flour to feed your starter. I eyeball fed my starter for about the first 6 months of making sourdough, and I still do it on occasion, especially if I'm really tired or just don't feel like it. I have a whole article on my website about how to do this, but basically you just want to add enough flour and water to get a pancake batter consistency, nice and thick. You have to do at least equal parts starter flour and water, but I like doing more flour and water than starter. So I will pour out most of what's in my jar, discard that, add it to my fridge into my discard jar, and then put in a nice big scoop of flour and enough water to get a pancake batter consistency. Opinion on adding a pinch of yeast for a hybrid dough. My opinion is do whatever works for you.
Obviously, don't go and do that.
Now, you do whatever you like.
We can't condone anything of the sort.
No, we can't. Live!
If you want to add a pinch of yeast, do it. Honestly, whatever gets you making homemade bread and avoiding the crap from the grocery store, how can anyone be mad at that? I personally don't want to add a pinch of yeast because I want it to be 100% sourdough, but there's nothing wrong with doing that if that's what you like. In Italy, it's still considered sourdough if you have, I believe it's up to 0.05% yeast, commercial yeast. So it's a thing. People get really pressed about it. Don't listen to everybody else. If you want to do that, do it. I need to know about the bulk fermentation. Does it happen after or during the stretch and folds? Okay, a lot of people get very confused about when bulk fermentation starts. It's very, very simple. As soon as you add your sourdough starter to your dough, that's when bulk fermentation begins. The yeast and the lactic acid bacteria in your starter is what will ferment your bread. So as soon as it's added, it starts fermenting. So during your stretch and folds, your bread is fermenting, and it stops at the pre-shaping. Now after the pre-shaping, your bread is still fermenting, but it's not called the bulk fermentation anymore. At that point, it's called something different. So like when you add your dough that's been shaped in your Banneton into your fridge, that's called the cold retard. But the bulk fermentation is when you add your starter to your dough to the time that you turn it out for the pre-shaping. That's the length. Does my starter need to breathe? I put a lid on mine, but I see others using cheesecloth. I think this is Somewhat personal preference. The only thing you need to be cautious of is if you have a tight seal on your lid. As yeast eats the starches in there, it produces carbon dioxide, which creates pressure. So if you have a super tight sealed on lid, it's possible that as your starter rises, your vessel will explode. And if it's glass, that's not pretty. And if you go to take off the lid, it can like fly up and actually be very dangerous because of the pressure that's been building in there. So just don't do a tight seal. I like to use a weck jar usually, and I'll just set the glass lid on top so that if it does overflow, it just squeezes through and it's not like building pressure to explode. What are your tips for reviving a starter that's been in the fridge a long time? Large format feeds. Bring out like 10 grams of what's in your fridge and feed it 50 grams flour and 50 grams water. Stir it really well. Wait to see what happens over like a 12 to 24 hour period. If nothing happens, do it again. 10 grams of whatever that is left in the jar, discard the rest, feed another 50 grams flour, another 15 grams water, and repeat. My friend Stephanie did this recently. Her starter was in the fridge for 3 months, I think, and it just took 2 feeds. And then her starter was back, happy and healthy again. But just keep doing that until your starter comes back. The longer your starter has been in the fridge, the more feeds it's gonna take to get it perked up and happy again. Do I have to let my starter come to room temperature before I feed it from the fridge? No, you don't. I don't usually do that. Everything else good, but why is my bowl dense and heavy? Dense and heavy together tells me that your loaf is probably underproofed. So I think you should extend your bulk fermentation time, or the time that your dough is sitting on the counter rising. It needs to be longer. How do you juggle a full-time job plus family plus content creation? I don't. I'm going crazy. I work a lot, probably 12 hours a day. It's a lot of work. I've found ways to be efficient at many things that I do so I can get a lot done in a short amount of time, but something is always falling through the cracks, to be perfectly honest. It's gotten a lot harder in the last month since my account has grown, which I'm very thankful for, but I get so many messages to the point where even if I answered every message that came in every second of my waking hours, I still wouldn't get to them all. So it's hard to find that cutoff of where do I stop helping people and pay attention to my family, and vice versa. It's a really hard thing to juggle. Hopefully I start making enough money soon to be able to bring on some help. Making a paycheck on Instagram/YouTube. How? Okay, this goes into my last question. So there are many different ways that people make money doing this sourdough social media stuff. My background is in blogging, so that's kind of what I've always been focused on. So my blog is thatsourdoughgal.com, and anytime someone goes there and reads an article that I've written or goes to a recipe, when you scroll past the ads on my page, I make a few pennies. And that's the primary way that I make an income doing this, is people visiting my website and making money off of those advertisements. The second biggest way that I make money is through affiliate commissions. So when I recommend a product and someone uses my link to purchase that recommendation, I usually earn a small commission. If it's from Amazon, some things can be as low as 1% commission. So obviously it would take a lot of purchases to actually mean anything. So Amazon is difficult, honestly. You need a pretty good volume to make any kind of money on Amazon. But working with brands directly usually is a lot better. Sometimes they'll pay 5-10% commission versus the 1%. And that is a lot easier to make money that way. So those are the two main ways that I make an income. There are lots of other ways, like some people will do sponsored videos with brands where they basically create an ad for a brand. I've done that once, but most brands don't want to pay for that. So it just hasn't been a sustainable way for me to make any kind of money yet. A lot of people sell digital products, like they will sell ebooks or worksheets, or they'll even sell recipes, but it's not something I've really gotten into yet. Maybe eventually I could put out like a recipe ebook or something. But for the moment, instead of charging someone for a recipe, I'd rather them just go to my website, get it for free, and make money off ads. I think everyone likes that better. A lot of sourdough people also sell products, like their dehydrated starter. It's not something I'm interested in doing, but these are just some ideas on how people make money. I just also got accepted into the YouTube Partner Program, so now my videos are able to have ads on them. I haven't seen any money from that yet, but it just yesterday finally got going. So now when people view my YouTube videos, similar to how people view my website pages, I will make a little bit of money. Is it a lot? No, but it's something. I'm also make a little bit off TikTok videos, but their qualifications are insane. Your video has to be at least 1 minute long. You can't have any products linked from TikTok Shop in the video. You can't have any mention in your description of going somewhere else, like visit my website, blah, blah, blah. That would be disqualified. They don't count every single view on a video. I don't even know how the heck that works. And the amount you get paid is so small. I think I probably make 50 cents for a video that qualifies. Sometimes you make like 50 bucks and it's like, whoa, big payday on that video, but that is a rare day. How did you and your husband meet? How long have you been married? We met at a bar. We locked eyes. He went to the bathroom. I stole his seat. He came back, said, what are you doing in my seat? And I said, is this your seat? And the rest is history. We have been married for 7 or 8 years. 7? I don't know. What web hosting / platform do you use for your website to keep it simple as a busy mom? As I mentioned, my background is in blogging, so I do not keep it simple when it comes to my website and my hosting and my platform. Everything is custom, so it's a WordPress website that I built. My web hosting is Big Scoots. They are more expensive, but they have really good support, which I have found is critical. If you're planning on making a website, do not go with a cheap hosting platform like Bluehost or GoDaddy. Don't do it. They're horrible. If you have a problem, you want somebody that will answer you, and Big Scoots literally answers. If you put in a support ticket, you get an email back in 30 seconds. It's insane. So Big Scoots, custom website built on WordPress. If you have any other questions about that, happy to answer, but I don't know how much detail people want about that. I'm gonna have to do a part 2 because my children need me. Stick around for part 2. There are so many more questions. Thank you to everyone who put them in. Make sure to follow me on Instagram if you don't already, because that is where these are coming from. I post on my stories every single day, usually multiple times a day, and it's very interactive. We do polls, we do these Q&As, all kinds of fun stuff, and I show you behind the scenes of what I'm doing every single day, and I'm very transparent about everything. So if you're not following me on Instagram, that is my favorite main platform to be on. And until next week, happy baking.